Hey there, Metals One. Today's the day I cast, so this video is going to be showing you the whole casting process. The first thing that I need to do while I'm waiting for the kiln to drop down to 900 degrees is to weigh out my silver for all of the different flasks. So this first one, I'm just using the small jewelry scale, and this is casting grain, sterling silver casting grain. So this is how the metal comes for casting. So you can see it's these really small little beads of silver, and this is all brand new. Generally, when you're casting, you want to use brand new metal, or you can also use a mix of scrap metal and casting grain, but really you get the best results when you're using metal that's brand new. Sometimes I cast with all scrap just because I have a ton of silver scrap, but you always want to make sure that the metal is nice and clean, because if it's dirty at all, then you can get weird pits or just inconsistencies in your casting. This is about 144 grams of sterling, and something that's also nice about casting grain is it's so small, so it melts a lot faster when you're heating it up. Here is our casting setup. So I'm on the left with the centrifuge, and then the kiln is on the far right, and then that easy cast vacuum caster in the middle, we're not using that. That's for a different kind of casting. So I'm just cranking up my crucible in the centrifuge here. So I usually rotate it clockwise about 3 times, and then there's a little pin that I pull up so that way it holds into place. And once the metal is all molten and we've got the flask in there, we'll pull that pin out and let it spin. Here I'm pouring the sterling silver into the crucible, and then I'll light my torch up. And something to note too is that I had the crucible in the kiln for a little bit while I was waiting for the temperature to drop to 900, which is the temperature that you want the flasks to be at when you're ready to cast. So by heating up the crucible beforehand, that just helps to get it ready for casting. And here I've got my torch. I'm using an acetylene torch for this, and I'm cranking up the pressure and actually opening the torch all the way so that I've got this really strong, powerful flame. So you can see I don't have the flask in the centrifuge just yet. It's going to go in that rounded cradle part. I'm going to wait to put the flask in there until my metal is completely molten. And here I'm just stirring around the metal a bit. As it starts to melt, it goes through a few different stages. Like, it'll start to look kind of slushy. Sometimes it'll look molten, but if you poke it with a carbon stick, you can sort of mix it around and you can see that it's not molten. And something that's nice about the carbon stick is that the silver doesn't really stick to it, and it doesn't make the silver dirty. And right there, I just threw some borax on my molten metal, and the borax helps keep it clean. And then here I gave the signal to Vince, and he's going to get the flask out of the kiln. And casting is always a two-person job like this, because you really can't remove the flame from the metal, because even once it's molten, if you remove the flame for a minute or a few seconds, it can start to solidify again, and then you'll have a messed up casting. So that's why you always use at least 2 people once you're casting. So I'm the one who's just heating the metal the whole time, and then Vince, he's the one who places the flask in the centrifuge once it's ready to go. So here I'm just making sure that the metal is molten, it's all looking good. I'm just giving it a final mix up with the carbon stick again. Setting it to the side there. And then Vince is reaching over to release the centrifuge, so he's going to swing the arm to the right and the pin drops down to free it. And then on 3, we're going to close the lid. So you see he drops the lid and I pull the torch back at the same time. And then here's a view of it from up top. And now the centrifuge is just going to spin. Usually it takes a few minutes, but once you hear it start to slow down, you can open up the lid. And what's happened during casting is the force from the centrifuge, once it starts spinning, forces the metal to shoot through the crucible into the flask. If you think about, if you've ever been at the beach or something, you filled up a pail with water and then you swing it around and around and the water stays in there. It's similar kind of force. And then here, we're taking the flask out, and it's got a nice button right there. So here it is up close. So I always let my flask sit to the side for a little bit until that button right there isn't glowing anymore. It's kind of hard to see through the camera right here, but it was glowing a slight red. And once it stops glowing, I'm going to dunk it in water. And you can see that it's still really hot, so I'm using tongs, but again, it doesn't have that red glow to it, so that way I know that all the metal inside has solidified. And you can see the investment is starting to sort of just rupture out. I am going to have to clean it out a bit and scrape it. We want to remove any sort of excess investment that's in there and get it ready for the next person who casts. So you can see that I'm just scraping that investment out, and oops, I lost my rings, so I had to go fishing for them. But here they are, and they've still got a lot of investment in all those spaces, so I'm going to try to clean that investment out as best as I can. And I'll usually just use some tweezers, a paintbrush, or dental tools for that. I am going to pickle these, but I want to make sure that I've got all the investment cleaned out as best as possible. So you can see here, I've cleaned it all out pretty much. There's still some areas that I can't get to, so I'm going to throw that in the ultrasonic. And something to note here too is that the silver, it looks black once it's been cast. So here's our ultrasonic. It's just heated water, and it vibrates, so that helps to remove any sort of dirt or investment, any sort of detritus away from it. And then here are all of your rings after they've come out of the pickle. So they have this really nice pickle white color, and that's how you'll get them. And then here I am cutting them off of those sprue trees to send to you all. And then here are those buttons with the sprue trees. They really look like trees there. And then here are the rings cut off. So maybe you can spot yours. And now here's just a bonus casting time-lapse video. I had recorded a few different time-lapses during this whole process, but didn't really edit them into the main part, but I don't know, maybe this is kind of fun to see it really sped up. So the next video that I'm going to be making is just a short one about how to clean up your rings once you've got them in the mail. You're just going to have to do some filing to remove the remnants of the sprue, and then also just generally filing in your ring to get rid of that casting texture, and then sanding it so that it's nice and smooth. So once again, I hope you enjoy watching the rest of this video, and I will see you in the next one.